Welcome to Make Art, a hands-on course for engineering design, a course taught at the University of South Florida. In this video, I will introduce Autodesk Maya's interface. Autodesk Maya is a 3D modeling, animation, simulation, and rendering software. Autodesk Maya 2016's interface should look similar to my interface here when you first open it. We'll notice that we have several different menus and toolbars, and we have a viewport that we're currently looking at. We also have timeline and some other tools and options down at the bottom that we'll go over. So first, let's go over our menu bar. That's right at the top. So Maya's menu bar has common menus, and it also has specific menus depending on which type of mode you're in, and we'll talk about the modes in a second. The common menus here, such as File, this is where you will create a new file. Now Maya calls its new files new scenes. It doesn't mean that it's a particular scene in a movie or an animation. It just means that it is a file. So Maya refers to the files again as scenes. So you can create a new scene, you can open a scene, you can save as. There's different incremental saves that you can set up. You can also do archives, and you can have preferences that relate back to how you save your scenes. This is where you can also do importing and exporting and have other types of image views and project setups that we'll go over. We have edit, create, select, modify, display, and window. We will go over all of these in future tutorials, but just note that this menu bar can change according to what mode you're in. So the next thing we're going to look at here is our status line. Our status line will tell us exactly what mode we're in, and you'll notice that when I'm holding just the mouse, I'm not even holding any mouse button down, but when I hover over an area, it will tell me what that little icon represents. So for instance, what we just went over, new scene, open scene, save scene, you have undo, you have redo. These buttons here are kind of shortcut buttons to get to those menu functions. Where we have this little drop down, this is the mode that you could be in. And Maya has a few different modes: modeling, rigging, animation, and you'll notice that as I change through these modes, the menu after Windows, right, the common menus stay the same, but after Windows you have particular menus that will show up that go with a particular mode that you're in. So for instance, modeling will have after window meshes, where we'll be able to create various different meshes and be able to adjust different meshes that we create, whether it's a polygon mesh or a NURBS mesh or sub-D mesh. Same thing with animation. After Windows, it goes to key. So just be aware that your top menu bar could look different depending on which mode you're in. So the next one, like I said, is the status line. The status line here just tells you, again, gives you quick shortcuts for any kind of saving or undoing. You have these little kind of toggle sliders that you can open and close. So if you want to hide some of those icons, you can. Then the next set of menus deal with what kind of modeling mode or selection mode you're in. So you have select by object type, you have select by component, and then you have select by hierarchy. And again, we'll go over these in more detail. And then you have different masking options or different snapping options that you can do. So here you have different select options. So if you build kind of a joint structure, or if you're just in particular trying to select a polygon or a surface, you might shut off these so that you won't select them and just leave on your surface. So here they're currently on by default. Then you have different locking options, so you can lock your current selection. You have different selection types, so you can highlight, and then you have snapping options. So all these magnet icons are for snapping either to the grid or to a curve or to a point or to surface and so forth and so on. And then we have more toggle menus here that talk about construction history, and then these little clipboards talk about different types of rendering. The next set of tools here with these tabs and these icons. This is your shelf. So your shelf is another way for you to get to particular menus or tools very quickly without having to change your mode, go up to the menu, down to the tool, and in some cases over to the options. These shelves are prepackaged with Maya, so they're the default shelves that come with it. Again, polygons, sculpting, animation, so forth. And they're just tools that Maya thinks you might need, so they give them to you in this kind of shortcut fashion. The good thing about the shelf menu is that you have a custom shelf. So you can create your own custom tool shelf, and you can create multiple different shelves depending on what tools you use the most or what tools you use for a particular project. And these shelves can be saved, and you can bring them to different machines that have Maya on them and load them back up, so you don't always have to create the shelves over and over again. So I'll go over again in a future video how to create your own shelves and save your shelves and load your shelves depending on what you're using. So if we go over to the right side, we're looking at the channels box and the layers box. So the channels box will show you all the different types of attributes for a particular selected object. So these attributes will be attributes that you can animate. There'll be attributes that will help you scale and determine the exact size of the scale or the rotation or the position of your object. The layers options down here, you have 3 different tabs for layers. The main layers that you'll be using is the display layers. The display layers deals with kind of what you're viewing on the screen at a certain time. So you can create multiple different layers and turn the visibility on and off, or just turn them on to referenced or templated, depending on how you want to view your object. Render layers deals with more rendering still images for an animated sequence, and it's a way of separating different properties of that sequence, such as shadows, color, lighting, so that they can be put together later in your post-production in an editing software. You probably won't be using the render layers as much. Animation layers deals with allowing different keyframes and different poses or movements on a particular object or objects, and being able to make changes using various layers. So you could have an animation or an object moving one way in one layer and then try a different way of moving it in another layer, and then you could even blend those layers together. So it's a way of separating out kind of layers of animation that can be combined. Again, you'll be using the display layer the most. Now another window that is here in the right side panel that will show up is your attribute editor. The attribute editor gives you more of the surfaces or selected components attributes, such as color, display properties, size, rotation, position, all these types of things. And the way that you view that attribute editor for the first time is doing Control A. So if you click on Control A, the attribute editor should pop up. So now you can see I have my attribute editor open. I don't currently have any selection, so it's saying make a selection to view the attributes, but there's nothing in my scene. However, you can see that when the attribute editor is open, I also get the 2 tabs on the right side to toggle back and forth between my channel box and layer view and my attribute editor. You can also just hold Control and tap A on your keyboard, Control and A back and forth to toggle it opened or closed. So the next area we'll look at is down here. We have our timeline. Our timeline is set up by default. It should be set up to 120 frames of animation. And you'll see that you have a gray bar that you can left mouse button hold and drag, so you can kind of scrub through your timeline, or you can just click and you'll get to a particular frame. You'll notice that this little window here, little input box, will be changing depending on what your current frame is, so you can either click or type in a current frame to go to, and you'll see I typed in 200 and I can't see 200 because I only have 120 frames visible. However, you'll note that if I look here in my range slider, it says your start frame is 1, you're currently viewing 1 through 120 in your frames. However, you do have more frames here because you're just viewing to 120, but really you have 500 frames. So you can type in however many frames you want in there. So now I typed in 400. I'm still only viewing 120, so I can click this little box next to 120 and drag it down till the end, and now I can see my 400 frames. I can drag from 1 over to a particular number of frame, and now I'm just viewing that set of frames, or I can drag the entire range slider to view that set of frames. So this helps when you really want to concentrate just animating a certain area of the animation or a certain range of frames. Again, if you want to just view all the frames, you just make sure that this bar is fully filling the range area, and then you can see that amount of frames. One thing to note also is that by default, Maya is set up to animate at 24 frames per second. So 24 frames of animation equals 1 second of time. So you'll also note that we have our control panel here, or our timeline control, so we can play through the animations. We can back up or move forward in time. We can back up to a particular frame or a particular keyframe, and I currently don't have any keyframes in my scene, so it's not going to jump to that particular keyframe. Another thing to note also is that if you right-click on the timeline, you have different functions, whether you copy, paste, delete frames, snap your frames to an actual value that's an integer value and not a float value or decimal point value. You can convert keys, and then you also have playback speed. So by default, Maya is set up for play every frame free, and this allows it to free up RAM and memory to drive Maya and just allow you to view animation. But it does not play the animation back at 24 frames a second. To view at 24 frames a second real time, you would need to make sure that the real time setting is on. So again, you right click over the timeline, playback speed, and real time. And that will give you real-time playback for that animation, depending on how intense the animation is. If you have like a lot of particle systems or something like that, it could still bog down your machine. So underneath your range slider, you have your command line window. Your MEL, or Maya Embedded Language, input box allows you to input one line of code to select objects or build objects or do something with in Maya's command line. And then you'll see right next to that, you'll get the results of that command, or you'll get results of what you're doing currently in Maya. If you're selecting something or clicking on something, the command line will give you that type of feedback. And you'll note that there's a little box here that can open up the actual script editor. So the script editor box will have an input box, an output box at the top and an input box at the bottom. That will allow you to write multiple lines of MEL code or multiple lines of Python, depending on what type of coding you would like or prefer to use. Down at the very bottom, we have our help line. So this will just give you little tips and different feedback. So you can see as I'm mousing over some of these icons to the left side on the toolbar, I'm getting feedback at the bottom here in the help line. So we can see the tool line here. We have our select tool, our lasso selection tool, our paint selection tool, our move, rotate, and scale tools, which are very important for manipulating objects and moving components within Maya. Underneath that, we have our just kind of default display layouts that Maya gives you. So you can click on these to jump to various kind of views. You can make your own view layouts and save them in here as well. But Maya keeps these kind of over on the side as defaults. So for your tools, the easy way to access these tools is using shortcuts. The shortcuts tools that you'll use the most are the shortcut keys Q. So Q will jump to your selection arrow, W will go to your move, E will go to rotate, R will go to scale. So you have Q for your selection, W for move, E rotate, and R scale, Q, W, E, R. Those four buttons right next to each other on the keyboard, very important. It will save you a lot of time. If we look at Maya's viewport, we can see that we're currently in the perspective view and we're looking at the grid. The grid represents the 0, 0, 0 plane within Maya. So if we hold our Alt key and left mouse button down, we can toggle around. So Alt and left mouse button down, we're toggling around. And we'll notice that when we're toggling, we can see our little compass to the bottom left is moving along with us to let us know which axes we're looking at and where those axes are located. So if the lines of these axes are facing, so if, for instance, X is facing to the right, that means that we're looking at the Z, which is our front axes, and our back axes. We're currently looking right at Z, which means we're looking right at the front. And Y is our up and down. Again, X is left and right. So anywhere to the right of the grid is positive in X. Anywhere to the left is negative in X. Anywhere forward in the grid is positive Z. Anywhere backward in the grid is negative Z. Anywhere above the grid is positive Y. Anywhere below the grid is negative Y. And we know again that we're facing the right way when we're looking at that particular axis and X is to the right. These axes can be changed, so if you prefer to have Z as your up axis, you can change that in the preferences, which we'll talk about later. Another thing to note about the viewport is that each viewport that you'll have in Maya has its own particular menu, and the menu controls the way that you're viewing geometry or how that viewport is displaying different things like camera safe areas, or if you want to turn the grid on and off, if you want to view lighting, or if you want to view a wireframe or a shaded mode or a textured mode, you can do that. So switching from your perspective view to other views is pretty simple. You just make sure your mouse is in the view and you just tap your spacebar. When you tap your spacebar, you'll jump out to Maya's 4 view, which shows you your orthographic views of your top, front, side, and perspective. When you click in a view, that it becomes the active view. So if you have animation that you want to watch and you want to watch it in the front view, you click on the front view so it will play the animation back in the front view when you click on your play in the control panel. If you want to jump into the front view because you want to see more detail, all you have to do is make sure your mouse is in the front view, tap the space bar, and now you'll jump to the front view. If you tap your space bar again, you'll jump out, move your mouse to the top, tap to view the top, and so forth and so on as you go in and out. So again, each viewport has its own menu, so that menu will control that particular viewport only. So that's our brief overview of the Maya interface. We'll be going over different features in more detail in later videos. Thank you.